Hello, and welcome to ML's Audiobooks. This channel is dedicated to filling in any of the gaps in the available audiobook forms of Marxist literature, and I hope you find this resource useful. Thank you. Today, I will be reading The Right of Nations to Self-Determination by Vladmir Ilyich Lenin. Originally published in 1914 and sourced from Lenin's collected works, published by Progress Publishers in 1972, Volume 20, pages 393 to 454. As posted on Marxists.org. Chapter 2. The Historically Concrete Presentation of the Question. The categorical requirement of Marxist theory in investigating any social question is that it be examined within definite historical limits and, if it refers to a particular country, e.g. the national program for a given country, that account be taken of the specific features distinguishing that country from others in the same historical epoch. What does this categorical requirement of Marxism imply in its application to the question under discussion? First of all, it implies that a clear distinction must be drawn between the two periods of capitalism, which differ radically from each other as far as the national movement is concerned. On the one hand, there is the period of the collapse of feudalism and absolutism, the period of the formation of the bourgeois democratic society and state, when the national movements for the first time become mass movements and in one way or another draw all classes of the population into politics through the press, participation in representative institutions, etc. On the other hand, there is the period of fully formed capitalist states with a long-established constitutional regime and a highly developed antagonism between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, a period that may be called the eve of capitalism's downfall. The typical features of the first period are the awakening of national movements and the drawing of the peasants, the most numerous and most sluggish section of the population, into these movements, in connection with the struggle for political liberty in general and for the rights of the nation in particular. Typical features of the second period are the absence of mass bourgeois democratic movements and the fact that developed capitalism, in bringing closer together nations that have already been fully drawn into commercial intercourse and causing them to intermingle to an increasing degree, brings the antagonism between internationally united capital and the international working class movement into the forefront. Of course, the two periods are not walled off from each other. They are connected by numerous transitional links, the various countries differing from each other in the rapidity of their national development, in the national makeup and distribution of their population, and so on. There can be no question of the Marxists of any country drawing up their national program without taking into account all these general historical and concrete state conditions. It is here that we come up against the weakest point in Rosa Luxemburg's arguments. With extraordinary zeal, she embellishes her article with a collection of hard words directed against Section 9 of our program, which she declares to be, quote, sweeping, unquote, quote, a platitude, unquote, quote, a metaphysical phrase, unquote, and so on without end. It would be natural to expect an author who so admirably condemns metaphysics, beginning parentheses, in the Marxist sense, i.e. anti-dialectics, end parentheses, and empty abstractions to set us an example of how to make a concrete historical analysis of the question. The question at issue is the national program of the Marxists of a definite country, Russia, in a definite period, the beginning of the 20th century. But does Rosa Luxemburg raise the question as to what historical period Russia is passing through, or what are the concrete features of the national question and the national movements of that particular country in that particular period? No, she does not. She says absolutely nothing about it. In her work, you will not find even the shadow of an analysis of how the national question stands in Russia in the present historical period, or of the specific features of Russia in this particular respect. We are told that the national question in the Balkans is presented differently from that in Ireland, that Marx appraised the Polish and Czech national movements in the concrete conditions of 1848 in such and such a way, beginning parentheses, a page of excerpts from Marx, end parentheses, that Engels appraised the struggle of the forest cantons of Switzerland against Austria and the Battle of Morgarten, which took place in 1315 in such and such a way, beginning parentheses, a page of quotations from Engels with the appropriate comments from Kautsky, end parentheses, that Lassalle regarded the peasant war in Germany of the 16th century as reactionary, etc. It cannot be said that these remarks and quotations have any novelty about them, but at all events it is interesting for the reader to be occasionally reminded just how Marx, Engels, and Lassalle approached the analysis of concrete historical problems in individual countries, And a perusal of these instructive quotations from Marx and Engels reveals most strikingly the ridiculous position Rosa Luxemburg has placed herself in. She preaches eloquently and angrily the need for a concrete historical analysis of the national question in different countries at different times, but she does not make the least attempt to determine what historical stage in the development of capitalism Russia is passing through at the beginning of the 20th century, or what the specific features of the national question in this country are. Rosa Luxemburg gives examples of how others have treated this question in a Marxist fashion, as if deliberately stressing how often the road to hell is paved with good intentions and how often good counsel covers up unwillingness or inability to follow such advice in practice. Here is one of her edifying comparisons. In protesting against the demand for the independence of Poland, Rosa Luxemburg refers to a pamphlet she wrote in 1898, proving the rapid, quote, industrial development of Poland, unquote, with the latter's manufactured goods being marketed in Russia. Needless to say, no conclusion whatever can be drawn from this on the question of the right to self-determination. It only proves the disappearance of the old Poland, of the landed gentry, etc. But Rosa Luxemburg always passes on imperceptibly to the conclusion that among the factors that unite Russia and Poland, the purely economic factors of modern capitalist relations now predominate. Then our Rosa proceeds to the question of autonomy, and though her article is entitled, quote, The National Question and Autonomy, unquote, in general she begins to argue that the Kingdom of Poland has an exclusive right to autonomy, beginning parentheses, see Vladmir, 1913, number 12, end parentheses. To support Poland's right to autonomy, Rosa Luxemburg evidently judges the state system of Russia by her economic, political, and sociological characteristics in everyday life, a totality of features which, taken together, produce the concept of, quote, Asiatic despotism, unquote. It is generally known that this kind of state system possesses great stability whenever completely patriarchal and pre-capitalist features predominate in the economic system and where commodity production and class differentiation are scarcely developed. However, if in a country whose state system is distinctly pre-capitalist in character there exists a nationally demarcated region where capitalism is rapidly developing, then, the more rapidly that capitalism develops, the greater will be the antagonism between it and the pre-capitalist state system, and the more likely will be the separation of the progressive region from the whole, with which it is connected, not by, quote, modern capitalistic, unquote, but by, quote, Asiatically despotic, unquote, ties. Thus, Rosa Luxemburg does not get her arguments to hang together even on the question of the social structure of the government in Russia with regard to bourgeois Poland. As for the concrete, historical, specific features of the national movements in Russia, she does not even raise that question. That is a point we must now deal with. End of chapter.